You know this feeling intimately. It is that quiet, heavy exhaustion that settles into your bones long after the house has gone to sleep. You are lying there, staring at the ceiling in the dark, replaying conversations where the silence was always louder than the words. Over the years, a specific, stinging vocabulary has been handed to you by the people you cared for most. They called you guarded. They said you were difficult. They told you in 100 subtle ways that your emotional depth was simply too much. You did the work. You communicated your needs. You held firmly onto your reality when someone else tried to warp it. And yet there is a persistent low hum of wrongness. It is an insidious, creeping doubt that whispers in the empty space of your room, asking if your boundaries are the very things keeping you alone. You wonder if your absolute refusal to bend your perception of the truth makes you fundamentally unlovable. You watch others effortlessly trade their authenticity for connection. You watch them slip comfortably into compliance, shrinking their lives to fit neatly into the spaces others have carved out for them. And you ask yourself why you cannot do the same, why you cannot just let things slide. It feels like a profound, undeniable flaw in your design. But this heavy isolation you are enduring right now is not a symptom of a broken or unlovable nature. It is the clinical, inevitable weight of a mind refusing to abandon itself. You are not failing at love. You are failing at something else entirely. To understand why you feel this profound, persistent friction in your relationships, we must first look backward. We have to examine the quiet architecture of your emotional survival. Long before you ever lay awake in the dark, questioning if you were fundamentally unlovable, you were taught a very specific, silent definition of what love actually entails. This curriculum was not delivered through grand lectures. It was absorbed through the heavy atmosphere of your early environment. It was taught through the subtle tightening of a caregiver's jaw, the withdrawal of warmth when you asked for too much, the palpable sigh of relief when you simply agreed, silenced your own needs, and shrank into the background. You learned, through 1,000 invisible micro-corrections, that being lovable was entirely synonymous with being compliant. The highest praise you could earn was that you were easy. Easy to manage, easy to redirect, easy to ignore. The renowned Swiss psychiatrist, Dr. Paul Tournier, dedicated his life to understanding this exact fracture in the human soul. He observed that to survive these conditional environments, we unconsciously split ourselves into two distinct entities, the person and the personage. The person is your absolute truth. It is your authentic, vulnerable, raw reality. It holds your genuine intuition, your natural boundaries, your deep capacity for connection, and your unpolished emotions. But the personage is the mask. It is the constructed social shell. The diplomat, the character you meticulously designed to navigate a world that found your raw reality too inconvenient to handle. Your personage developed not out of deception, but out of desperate self-preservation. In your early life, your emotional autonomy was actively penalized. The adults or peers in your environment likely lacked the psychological capacity to process their own inner turbulence, so they demanded that you be manageable. They needed you to be pliant so they could feel in control. Whenever you exhibited a firm boundary, it threatened their fragile equilibrium. If you stood firm in your own reality, you were quickly labeled stubborn, difficult, or overly sensitive. Submission was rewarded with a shallow, temporary affection. Autonomy was punished with coldness, isolation, or anger. So you adapted. You wore the mask to keep the peace. You traded your truth for their comfort. If this reflection makes sense to you, click the subscribe button to join our psychological journey. But a profound awakening happens as we mature. Eventually, the crushing exhaustion of the performance outweighs the primal fear of rejection. You slowly begin to realize that a life lived entirely through the personage is a life of quiet starvation. You can receive applause, approval, and conditional validation through your mask, but the mask cannot absorb love. It is synthetic armor. When someone falls in love with your compliance, your true inner self simply starves in the dark. Only the authentic person can actually feel loved. And so, perhaps without even realizing it, you made a silent, monumental decision. You chose to start honoring the person. You stopped blindly agreeing just to soothe the tension in the room. You started saying no without offering a desperate essay of apologies. You refused to shrink your reality just because it made someone else's reality feel insecure. This is exactly where the friction begins. Preserving your authentic person is an act of quiet rebellion. And it fundamentally disrupts the comfortable illusions of the social masks around you. Most people are still entirely trapped in their personage. They rely on unspoken scripts. They want their interactions to be predictable, compliant, and comfortably superficial. When they encounter your authentic person, someone who cannot be easily swayed by guilt, who does not rush to fix a manufactured silence, who looks right through the performance, it shatters their script. To them, you are no longer playing by the rules of the game. They are looking for a supporting actor for their illusion, and you are offering them unbending reality because they cannot manage you. They equate your refusal to be controlled with a lack of love. They call you guarded. They call you too much. You are not difficult. You are simply real. And reality is incredibly inconvenient for someone who only knows how to operate in an illusion. But maintaining this absolute truth in a world that aggressively demands your compliance does not come without a cost. There is a silent daily toll extracted from your nervous system, a slow, invisible bleed that happens when you constantly have to protect the gates of your own mind. Consider the weight of an ordinary morning. You wake up, and before you have even spoken a word to anyone, there is a preemptive exhaustion resting heavily in your bones. This is not the fatigue of physical labor or a lack of sleep. It is the chronic, invisible weariness of a mind that is perpetually on alert. You have learned to read the temperature of a room before you fully enter it. You subconsciously scan the micro-expressions of the people around you, the slight shifts in their tone, the lingering silences that are not peaceful but loaded with silent expectations. Every day you are quietly analyzing motives because experience has taught you that in your relationships, most requests are not actually requests. They are demands wrapped in the polite disguise of a gentle suggestion. When you are fundamentally resistant to manipulation, your daily life becomes an endless, quiet negotiation of boundaries. It rarely looks like a dramatic, theatrical screaming match. It looks painfully mundane. It looks like someone asking you to do a favor that clearly crosses your stated limits, and when you politely decline, they respond with a soft, calculated sigh, a slight withdrawal of their affection, a sentence starting with, "Well, I just thought." You hold your ground, you protect your authentic self, but the sheer emotional effort it takes to maintain that simple two-letter word drains your deepest reserves. You are penalized for your autonomy not with loud anger, but with a weaponized, suffocating disappointment. And so you spend your days guarding the gates of your own reality, exhausted by people who treat your boundaries not as lines to respect, but as puzzles to solve or obstacles to dismantle. Dr. Paul Tournier observed a profound phenomenon he referred to as the body acting as a signal system. Your physical form, your biology, knows when your authentic person is being threatened long before your conscious mind can logically articulate the danger. Notice what happens to you in the presence of someone who subtly tries to bypass your autonomy. The conversation might seem entirely normal on the surface. They are smiling. The words are calm and socially acceptable, yet an undeniable quiet dread begins to pool in the pit of your stomach. Your jaw clenches without you realizing it. Your breathing becomes shallow, trapped high in your chest. And when that person finally leaves the room, you are hit with a sudden, inexplicable wave of lethargy. You just want to close your eyes. You feel the heavy, almost paralyzing urge to sleep. This physical crash is not a medical mystery. It is the biological cost of your nervous system working in absolute overdrive to protect your psychological integrity from an invisible threat. Your body is screaming the truth that the polite social mask ignores. You are being slowly consumed. Perhaps the most isolating symptom of this internal tension is the hollow nature of what you are told is relational success. There are days when the friction disappears entirely. The relationship feels smooth, harmonious, and seemingly perfect. But in the quiet moments alone, staring out the window or lying in the dark, you feel a sickening, echoing emptiness. You realize that the peace was not achieved through mutual understanding or genuine connection. It was achieved exclusively through your self-diminishment. The relationship is only succeeding because you quietly agreed to shrink your reality, to swallow your intuition, and to perform the exact script that makes the other person comfortable. You are rewarded with their smiles and their affection, but it feels like a ghost's embrace. You know, with a heartbreaking certainty, that they do not actually love you. They love the compliant version of you that they have constructed in their mind. They love the convenience of your silence. They love the absence of your resistance. You are trapped in a cruel, invisible paradox. When you assert your true self, you are labeled difficult, guarded, and too much. When you abandon your true self, you are praised as lovable, but you slowly suffocate inside. You carry this heavy burden every day, quietly wondering if your refusal to bend your reality is a fatal flaw in your character. But this persistent friction, this label of being hard to love that has been so consistently projected onto you, is hiding a much darker mechanism. Because the conflict you're experiencing is not actually about your inability to connect. It is about something far more insidious taking place in the mind of the other person, the exact moment they realize their script has failed. To understand the precise nature of your exhaustion, we must look beneath the surface of these interactions and examine the silent, psychological mechanics at play. Dr. Paul Tournier often spoke of a profound human condition, the fear of being known. It is a concept that perfectly explains the quiet warfare you have been surviving. You have likely spent a great deal of your life surrounded by individuals who operate almost entirely from their personage. For these people, the social mask is no longer a temporary shield. It has become their entire identity. It is a fragile, tightly choreographed script designed to keep the world manageable, predictable, and safely at arm's length. They are deeply, quietly terrified of genuine reality. To be truly known would mean exposing their own flaws, their own insecurities, and their own ordinary human frailty. So they construct a labyrinth of deflection. They do not seek authentic relationships. They seek compliant mirrors. They need the people around them to reflect only their preferred image, never their actual truth. And then they encounter you who are trying so desperately to exist as a true person. You bring your authentic, boundaried self to the table. You ask real questions. You observe the discrepancies between what they say and what they do. You intuitively sense the unspoken undercurrents in the room, and you refuse to blindly participate in the comfortable illusions they use to keep themselves safe. You think you are simply being honest. You think you are trying to build a genuine connection. But to a mind governed entirely by an insecure personage, your authenticity is not refreshing. It is a terrifying existential threat. When you refuse to be controlled, when you calmly state a boundary, decline an unspoken demand to shrink, or simply hold your ground in the face of subtle manipulation, you shatter their script. You force them out of their carefully managed play and into a moment of unscripted, undeniable reality. And in that brief, piercing silence, the manipulator is forced to confront their own profound emptiness. They are forced to stare into the hollow natures of their own mask. But human beings will go to extraordinary lengths to avoid facing their own psychological void. They do not self-reflect, they project. The psychological defense mechanism clicks into place with devastating speed. In order to survive the mirror you just held up to them, they must make you the problem. They cannot admit that they are terrified of intimacy, so they must convince you that your version of intimacy is flawed. This is the exact moment the label is born. You are suddenly too difficult. You are impossible to please. You are guarded or stubborn. They expertly weaponize guilt, twisting your healthy self-preservation into a severe character flaw. They may even play the victim of your boundaries, acting wounded to make you feel as though your totally normal need for respect is an act of profound cruelty against them. They shift the narrative so seamlessly that your refusal to be consumed suddenly looks like a refusal to connect. Take a moment to truly process this. Let the weight of it settle into the quiet spaces of your mind. You were never failing at love. You were failing to comply. You were failing to be an obedient prop in a play they wrote to soothe their own unresolved pain. Love to the deeply masked individual is synonymous with utility. If you are useful, if you are endlessly accommodating, silent about your own needs, and willing to abandon your reality to uphold theirs, you are deemed lovable. The second you assert your own separate, autonomous existence, you lose your utility, and therefore, in their eyes, you lose your lovability. Have you ever felt this exact quiet shift? That sudden, chilling moment when someone's affection turned to ice simply because you said no, or because you refused to bend your truth? Share your internal reflection with us in the comments below. Putting words to that silent memory is the first step in dismantling the heavy guilt they left behind. It is a brutal, agonizing realization. To finally understand that the people who called you difficult were often simply angry that they could not use you. You have spent years carrying the heavy belief that your core was somehow defective, that your very nature made you incompatible with human warmth. But what happens when a person believes this lie for too long? What happens to the authentic self when it is constantly told it is the source of its own isolation? You begin to search for a cure for an illness you never had, and the quiet, desperate ways you tried to fix your perceived unlovability. That might be the most heartbreaking part of all. There comes a quiet, devastating breaking point. A moment when the relentless friction of defending your reality gives way to a haunting, heavy fatigue. You lie awake, staring at the ceiling in the dark, replaying every severed connection and every accusation of being too much or too difficult until a dark, insidious question takes root in your mind. Maybe they are right. Maybe I am the problem. In the shadow of this exhaustion, you abandon the defense of your authentic self and begin the tragic, quiet work of self-amputation. You try to cure your perceived unlovability through the slow, methodical shrinking of your personality. You adopt what we can call the false solutions, desperate, silent strategies designed to make you digestible to people who lack the capacity to digest depth. You decide that if your boundaries cause friction, you will simply sand them down until you are smooth, compliant, and undetectable. You forcefully suppress your sharp intuition. When your gut screams that a situation is subtly manipulative or that a partner's affection is highly conditional, you silence the alarm. You label your own clarity as overthinking. You convince yourself that your natural instinct to protect your psychological space is just an irrational flaw you need to fix. And then you attempt the most draining false solution of all. You try to become entirely low maintenance. It is a brutal clinical term disguised as a compliment. To be low maintenance is to demand absolutely nothing. It is to strip your humanity of its needs, its textures, and its voice. When someone casually steps over a line, you do not pull away. Instead, you soften your tone. You analyze their childhood, their stress, their bad day, manufacturing endless empathy for their transgressions while starving yourself of basic respect. You sit alone, drafting long, carefully curated messages, over-explaining your most fundamental human needs to people who are entirely committed to misunderstanding you. You treat their refusal to see you as a mere lack of information. You believe, with a heartbreaking innocence, that if you can just explain your boundaries more gently, if you can just make your pain more palatable, they will finally step out of their ego and love you. They will not. Here is the psychological reality you are avoiding. You are attempting to negotiate a genuine connection with an illusion. When a person operates entirely through their personage, their rigid, insecure social mask, they are fundamentally incapable of recognizing your authentic person. When you abandon your reality to appease their mask, you are not building a relationship. You are participating in a mutual delusion. You are feeding their desperate need for control, hoping that if you sacrifice enough of your autonomy, they will eventually love the ghost you have become. But appeasing a mask never earns love. It only earns utility. You become a convenient mirror, reflecting back to them the comfortable, unchallenged version of themselves they so desperately need to see. You exist merely as an emotional appliance in their life, useful, quiet, and easily stored away when not required. In exchange for this total compliance, you receive a terrifying, hollow peace. The arguments stop, the friction fades, the accusations of being guarded disappear. You have successfully engineered yourself to be perfectly easy to manage. Yet this false solution breeds a profound, freezing isolation. You are in the room with them, but you have never been more alone. The true cost of this compromise is the agonizing death of your inner dialogue. You stop trusting your own mind. You begin to view your inherent depth, your protective instincts, and your natural emotional autonomy as burdens that must be disciplined away. The authentic self inside you goes entirely silent, locked away in a dark room, suffocating from the lack of truth. You made yourself easy to consume, and in doing so, you allowed yourself to be entirely consumed. But the human psyche can only tolerate the suppression of the true self for so long. The illusion of this manufactured peace eventually begins to fracture, leaving you to face a sudden, undeniable realization about what genuine connection actually requires. There is a quiet, monumental shift that happens when you stop shrinking your reality to fit someone else's fractured world. You realize that the friction you have carried was never a failure of romance. It was the friction of a genuine self surviving in an environment addicted to illusions. To be labeled difficult by someone who only wanted a compliant reflection of their own ego is not a flaw. It is a profound psychological victory. Maturation is the exhausting, beautiful process of letting the mask fall away. It requires a singular courage to stand firmly in your own skin, refusing to perform the role of the personage just to keep a false peace. You have finally learned that peace bought with your autonomy is just another form of captivity. Authentic vulnerability does not mean lowering your boundaries for someone who demands submission. It is the calm, terrifying willingness to remain whole. It is the ultimate choice to wait for a connection where the desperate mechanics of control are entirely absent. A rare, still space where one true person can finally meet another person in complete, unforced understanding. They will not ask you to diminish your reality. They will simply meet you in the light of it. You are not hard to love. You never were. You are just finally, unapologetically, impossible to manipulate. If you found a piece of your own quiet truth here today, click subscribe to continue this psychological journey with us.